Thank you and Jimmy for asking me to present some of our transportation priorities for 2021. Much of what I'm going to present to you today is not necessarily project specific, although projects are very important and we will talk about some of those. A lot of what I'll be talking about are some of the core principles or strategies that define GBC advocacy for transportation policy, planning, and obviously funding. Before I get started, Robin and Jimmy might be helpful just to give a brief overview about the Greater Baltimore Committee. A lot of people don't necessarily know, but we're a regional business advocacy organization. Our focus is on economic growth and job creation, membership organization, private sector, businesses, large, mid-sized, small, as well as foundations, educational institutions, and not-for-profits. And again, although we started out strictly in Baltimore City 66 years ago, back in 1978, became more of a regional organization. So it's Baltimore City and the 5 surrounding jurisdictions, but oftentimes our advocacy is clearly on a statewide basis, although we do focus from a regional perspective. A number of years ago, we put together a report that was called Gaining a Competitive Edge, Key Pillars for Economic Growth and Job Creation. We did that by bringing together economic development directors and also local economic development directors to determine what really are key components to an effective business competitiveness, because a lot of times legislators aren't not really aware of exactly what goes into having a competitive business environment. And as a former legislator, I can say that because I've been there and know that, and I think that that's part of the challenge that we have. Well, one of those key pillars that the group determined after about 6 months and was that one of the key pillars is a superior transportation infrastructure with reliable funding mechanisms. And that's a core element of competitive environment because we need to have that to provide reliable and efficient mobility options to move people and products. So that's sort of an overwhelming thing that we move forward with. At this time, I'm going to ask Jennifer to go ahead and start the slide as a little PowerPoint presentation. They'll go over some of the other points that we focus on. And just once we get through the first slide, we'll provide these slides to you, of course. So the next one that we have, this year, the Greater Baltimore Committee created some 5 operational priorities. This was approved by our board of directors. And one of these is developing and promoting a comprehensive and efficient regional transportation system to move people, goods, and services, as we mentioned previously. This is a very important priority of the GBC. There's only 5 major priorities. This one, each one has a board lead, member of our board who serves as overseeing this area with me, reporting to our board as a liaison. John Laria of Ballard Spar serves as the chair of our Transportation Mobility Committee, so he is the board lead on this project, or this priority. So this is something that we do year round to look at, and also we'll report out periodically to the board of directors. Next slide talks a little bit about what are we laid out as legislative priorities for 2021. I won't read all of this, but obviously we're talking about a balanced transportation, mobility policy and funding to make sure that we make equitable investments across regions, modes, and communities. And that we urge policymakers to strategically invest in ways that contribute to economic growth, connect workers to employment, and move people and goods safely and efficiently. Again, going back still to that competitive business environment format that we had. Next slide. So when we do this advocacy, we do it on a number of different levels. One is at the local, state, and federal level, doing it to ensure that the region is adequately funded and maintained to ensure safe operations and also planning for future growth. So obviously system preservation is always a very important priority, and operational funding is a very important priority, but also making sure that we are planning for future growth and keeping up. As you know, it takes multiple years for any transportation projects to really move from concept to design to construction. So it's important that we're looking ahead and planning all the time moving forward. Next. So again, we look to advocate that funding is available at prioritized for maintenance and key projects. And again, focusing on that workforce connection We urge additional transportation funding for the Greater Baltimore region to make sure that we receive our fair share, and we certainly take steps and recognize that other jurisdictions and other areas have needs, but we feel that Baltimore region has been disproportionately receiving less than it should in state dollars. So we want to make sure that we receive those monies moving forward and make sure that that a fair share does come to the Baltimore area. Not that we oppose transportation principles throughout the entire state, because we know everybody needs some, but we just want to make sure that Baltimore gets its moving forward. So next slide again talks about looking that the operational and capital dollars are data driven and looking through an equity lens. Sometimes that's an issue that we think, and as you may recall, this past year when we do our transportation summit, we did one in the fall of 2020. And at that time, our focus was equity and transportation and equity policy. So we want to make sure that that is a specific area that the state is paying close attention to when they allocate dollars moving forward. And that's particularly important in the Baltimore region, and particularly Baltimore City, where there has been a disinvestment in some of the transit dependent areas of our area. The next bullet point that we have there, I'm sorry, go back if you would, Jennifer. The next bullet point that we have there talks about looking for advocating for consistent and adequate funding levels to deal with current system and reduce the backlog. And one of the things that we did back prior to the beginning of the year was state our board's opposition to some cuts that were being advanced by the state toward MTA, and we're fortunate and pleased that the state did make some changes and did return most of those cuts, service cuts back to restoring those for the Baltimore region. And then secondly, I saw that Klaus actually just posted this in the chat room, was the fact that we did advocate throughout the legislative session as well as last year for passage of the Transit Safety and Investment Act, which would provide a significant increase in the amount of money in the CTP that would help to go back, help come to Baltimore region and the MTA, help reduce some of that backlog of the what was a $4.8 million, $6 billion in needs from a needs assessment study a number of years ago, $2 billion of which was unfunded. So this would go toward helping to address that. That was a very significant piece of legislation. I know probably everybody on this Zoom meeting was involved in, and appreciate all your support. And pleased that Brooke Lehrman and Corey McCrae were lead advocates of this during the legislative session. And some of us may have participated in a call we had with President Ferguson prior to this matter really moving through the Senate. And we're pleased that he was very helpful in moving this forward as well. Next slide. So again, one of the key issues that we're looking at right now is, and have been engaged in, and hopefully will continue to be so with MTA, is participating and supporting the implementation of that Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan. In Baltimore, this is a 25-year plan, something that's very important for this region, something that we really have not had a long-term planning for in many years, ever since we lost the Red Line. There has really not been, which we were strong advocates for, and actually took about 13 years to get to the point where we had federal approvals and finances available for that until it was pulled. We really have had not had a long-range plan. The Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan is that effort. We need to make sure that we have really strong regional support for that, from business and community support, advocacy support. It's critically going to be important for the next administration, and the next couple of administrations are going to have to be involved in implementing that plan. I'm not sure that we're going to see a lot of implementation over the next 18 months or so till we have a new administration coming into Annapolis, but we need to be ready for that and use the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan as the keynote for us moving forward in that direction. Next is so some of the workforce connectivity, some of the areas that we really are focusing on and that is we want to make sure that we have strong connectivity to our major workforce and distribution centers, Port of Baltimore, BWI Airport. Obviously, tremendous growth right now taking place at Trade Point Atlantic, which is a great location for distribution, and right there on the 95 corridor. And then, of course, Port Covington, which we're just starting to see now beginning. But those are areas where we really have job growth opportunities. Trade Point Atlantic is already close to 10,000 employees in a very short period of time. At one time, they had projected 15,000 over a 10-year period, and they're going to, looks like they will far exceed that. But those are key employment hubs that we need to be paying particular attention to as we move forward. Next slide. Obviously, MARC is a major component for workforce, something significant for people even from throughout the whole corridor. There had been, as I recall, some cuts to this area. We need to make sure that any service cuts are restored when the time comes where people are returning back to the office. Of course, we're not sure exactly what returning to the office means as far as timing and or capacity yet, but that's something that we need to be paying particular attention to. MARC is a key component for workforce transportation and workforce access. Next slide. There's a study going on now, and there's been an awful lot of discussion about creating a regional authority. We certainly support the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board doing an analysis of that governance and funding structure. I know that the Greater Washington Partnership and Central Maryland Transportation Alliance had done a similar report previously. This is another one, I think, which is very critically important because you certainly have the elected officials in this region very much involved in this particular analysis. Whatever the outcome is, hopefully there will be some opportunities for some reform. They'll lay out some feasibility of implementing a model, and we're looking to provide some business community engagement in that study so they understand our perspective. I'm not sure the timing of that report. I've had a couple of meetings with the consultants on this project already, and looking forward to their outcome in the near future. But this is a very important issue, whether or not an authority is created itself or just whether or not there's any sorts of reforms that can be made. This is a critically important step in the process to ensure funding of priorities in the Baltimore region. Next slide. Just some of the projects that we are focusing on, paying attention to on this Howard Street Tunnel. And I know everyone assumes that everything's in place for the Howard Street Tunnel. It looks like that's true. At the same time, having looked at these projects and been involved in this for a number of years, this is something you always need to keep your eye on to make sure that you don't lose the timing on anything moving forward. So that's one that we hope to see moving forward. It's been discussed for many years, and we know that's critically important for the port and other activities in this region. And, with respect to the federal surface transportation reauthorization, the federal level, we've been asked by Baltimore City to advocate for 3 specific projects to be member designated projects. One is the Baltimore Greenway Trails Network. Of course, I think people are aware of that, but it's a 35-mile network. The hope of the money would go to accelerate design and construction activity for 3 segments of this network. The East-West Transit Priority Corridor, this is being done by the Baltimore City Department of Transportation, along with and Maryland Department of Transportation and MTA, sort of building off some of the work that they did in the North Avenue area as well. But this is provides some near-term investments while the region is waiting for see where we go with respect to the long-range effects, long-range planning for the regional transit plan. This would provide some dollars for implementing complete streets guidelines as well in this area. And then last is the Russell Street and Monroe Street bridges. These carry over 60,000 vehicles a day. They're major gateways into Baltimore. And if they're not, they're in poor condition. If they're not replaced soon, we've been told by the city that they could ultimately be closed. I think it's probably not in the very near future, but it's something that would need some investments right now. So those are the 3 projects that they've asked us to lend support, contact representatives in Washington and make sure that these become member designated projects in the federal surface transportation reauthorization. And then the last is one Penn Station redevelopment. We've certainly been supportive of a Penn Station redevelopment for a number of years. Hopefully we're getting very close to seeing that happen. So we'd like to see, it's another great gateway into Baltimore City from people just to travel here and also relating to workforce as well. Next slide focuses on something I think you all know of, and that is, of course, that every year or so, the Association of Civil Engineers puts out a infrastructure report card, and most recently they've given Maryland a C- in infrastructure. They're giving the state a C, and particularly with respect to transit, giving a D+. So based upon that, I think that helps to give some impetus for needs of infrastructure reform, which is great timing with respect to what's going on in Washington right now. And I think if we go to the next one slide, we'll see, of course, that through the Biden infrastructure plan or American Jobs Plan, there's real opportunities for historic investment in infrastructure's future, roads, bridges, public transportation. I know a lot of things are included other than just those three areas, broadband, et cetera, but that's a key component. BMP Tunnel is a project that has been out there for decades. The need for that, Baltimore being a chokehold area for that, we need to work to see if there's any sort of potential for funding for the BMP Tunnel. And I know that Joe and I have had some discussions about that with obviously Greater Washington Partnership having an interest with respect to that, but that's certainly right in the heart of Baltimore. We need to be paying close attention to that. And then lastly, just point out to you that we went 21 years without a transportation trust fund increase until 2013. It was quite a long haul to get to that point. I think that there's probably going to be a need for another transportation fund increase at some point in the future. It's something that we supported for about 10 years before it ever got passed in 2013 or 14. I think obviously that's going to have to wait for a new administration, but it's something that we can't stop looking at and looking forward to and getting ready to build a case for that because if we want to move some of these projects and really want to plan for the future and make sure that that regional transit plan advances, we need to make sure that there is the funding available, which goes back to one of the key components, and that is that we have a reliable funding mechanism for transportation. We may need to look at different ways. It may not be the gas tax any longer, but that's something I think that'll be debated at the national level and then also at the state level. So that's sort of an overview. I'm sorry I ran through that as quickly as I did and probably talked way too much, but be glad to open up for any questions that you may have for a few minutes. And then I indicated that I unfortunately have to jump off to head up another Zoom meeting at 9 o'clock. But if you have other questions, if you send those to Robin, I'll be glad to respond to those and to you, as well as provide the PowerPoint presentation. Robin, thank you.
Thanks very much, Don. Jimmy, did you want to kick off with questions?
Yeah, Don, I had several, but two of the ones that jump out at me are, does GBC have any, I'm sure you do have a point of view about the circulator, what its future and purpose is?
Well, yeah, Jimmy, we do. We certainly support the concept of the circulator. I think the challenge is that sometimes it has gotten beyond what was the original intention of the circulator. Originally, it was focused strictly on the downtown area, funded by parking revenues in the downtown area. That has seemed to expand as we move forward. I'm not necessarily opposed to seeing that sort of expansion, although what the funding mechanism is, I'm not sure. You can't rely strictly on parking revenues from the downtown business community. Right now, parking is a detriment to businesses and even businesses coming back after the pandemic. So the cost of parking is getting pretty hefty in this for a competitive environment. And I think we also need to make sure that we're collaborating closely with the MTA to make sure that there's no overlap of MTA services with the circulator. That would not be productive. So I'm fine with the, with the circuit has been running a deficit for many years. We need to figure out what the best way of funding that. If the city is just going to put that as part of its funding mechanism, or are we going to look at some other alternatives?
And one other quick question. How does GBC see the potentiality of a water transit system in Baltimore? And are you in favor of extending that around to Port Covington, Westport, and Cherry Hill?
Yeah, we think that that has been that we are supportive of that. Have been pleased to see it advancing. It's much better than it was years ago, and certainly think that the potential for expanding it is great. Again, the funding is a key component of how that's going to be funded. But it, when you look at waterfront, one of the great assets of Baltimore area is waterfront development is certainly attracted to the waterfront. So I think demand will certainly be there. It's just how do we coordinate the schedules? How do we make sure that we're providing it in a way that's as most efficient as possible? But yeah, we see that. We see both the circulator and the water taxi, water transportation as a key component to any sort of a multimodal effort.
Thank you. I want other people to be able to ask questions, Robin.
Sure. Do we have another question?
You can see in the chat, I was talking about the Penn Station Amtrak investment, and what I'm missing there is that there would be a pool of investments, and we're not just relying on Amtrak doing their plan, but that the city, the MTA, and other private owners chip in here and make this a really intermodal transportation hub, as well as a really clear TOD zone that could have as much impact as Denver and Penn Station, Union Station in Denver.
Yeah, Klaus, I sort of just slipped over that by saying it being a great gateway, but you're right, it does have potential for being a great TOD hub. And just even when you go online and look at what Denver station is like, both as far as just its appearance as well as what it's done, I think it's a tremendous example for us to aspire to.
Don, I noticed that none of your discussion included maglev. Have you guys done anything with that yet?
Well, Hans, GBC has been a long time supporter of maglev. Actually, ironically, back in 1991, when I was first elected to the legislature, that was one of the first votes I probably took, was about $100,000 feasibility study on maglev that was approved. At that time, the focus was on Germany rather than now, of course, Japan and China. I think our position remains the same, that we are supportive of it. I think it would make, if you're going to develop it, if you're going to build it for the Northeast corridor, there's no better place to have a initial demonstration project or beginning between two major metropolitan areas, Washington, Baltimore area. Obviously, I don't want to see a lot of state dollars, and I don't think we're looking to see state dollars invested in maglev. We'd rather see it at a federal level and or private sector, and or obviously with foreign government involvement. There's some sort of particular that way. I'm a little concerned about the most recent report that came out that talked about where these potential station locations were going to be. I'm not so sure that Cherry Hill or the other location that's been identified are the best locations if we're going to have that. So I think that's one of the concerns I've expressed in trying to set up a meeting to talk with the maglev people about that. But overall, we still remain supportive of the concept. It's just, again, it's been, as you know, it's been going on since probably the mid 80s. It's been talked about. But if we're talking about high-speed rail of more than 110, 150 miles an hour, that seems to be the area that people are looking at. And but I think it's going to have to be at the federal investment level, not the state level.
Don, I have a question with respect to autonomous vehicles and vans. Is that on GBC's radar at all?
It's on our radar. Obviously, I think we have not been focused on that of late because of the other challenges that have come about because of the pandemic that comes on, and we're focusing a lot on just recovery of businesses and getting businesses back to the location. But I think that that's something that we will be paying more close attention to moving forward and tracking those very much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, as we mentioned earlier, please feel free to email robin@transitchoices.org with any questions that come to mind for Don. We will be happy to forward them to him for a response. Don, we know that you need to run, but we thank you so much for giving us your time and a wonderful presentation. It was very interesting. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And Joe, I'm sorry I have to bug off before your presentation, but no disrespect there. Thanks very much.
Definitely.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Well, we are delighted to present to you Joe McAndrew, who is Vice President of Transportation with the Greater Washington Partnership. Joe is going to speak with us today about Explore the Capital Region Rail Vision. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you, Robin, Jimmy, and colleagues and partners here. It's a good crew. And I've got a few fact checkers at M.MTA and Amtrak on here, it looks like. So if I get anything wrong, I will turn to friends to make sure that I don't step in it. So let me share my screen real quick here. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Cool. Let's see if this thing gets moving here. There we go. So just a real quick primer, Don's a great partner. We love working with them, and a lot of the work that they're doing is positive and proactive. I think the Transit Safety and Investment Act is just one of those great examples of what GBC can do. I think he glossed over it really quickly, but at a critical moment during the bill's trajectory this last year, the advocacy community was doing a yeoman's work, and Don and John Laria really stepped in and talked to some higher orders that be to help kind of untangle a few things and get the bill moving in the Senate, which was really positive. But I'm here to talk about the Capital Region Rail Vision. Before I get into that, real quick, highlight kind of who the partnership is for those folks that aren't aware. The partnership is a civic alliance of the leading employers stretching from Baltimore to Richmond, focused on trying to tackle a few key areas that get in the way of regional collaboration, investment, and execution that ultimately stymie our progress and productivity. At this scale, we're the third largest economy in the U.S., seventh largest in the world, and we've got immense opportunity if we can go ahead and connect the dots and ultimately achieve progress against some visioning work. The folks on the board comprise some of the largest employers here that you can see collectively employing 230,000 folks throughout the region. They themselves, within the transportation space, create demand on the system, positive and negative, depending how you look at it. And they themselves can be part of the solution, and they want to be part of the solution. And that's what we were put together to work on. Outside of transportation that I work on, and my colleague John Hilligus, who's on here today as well, work collectively on. We also deeply engage K-12 and higher ed tech talent pipeline work with the Capital CoLab initiative. And then as of last week, kicked off an inclusive growth strategy council that's ultimately working to look across the board from housing to transportation to financing and racial wealth and income gaps, and trying to close that for our region's prosperity. I'm here to talk about rail now, so I'm going to just jump into it. So in 2018, the partnership released a blueprint for regional mobility that looked at everything from rails, trails, transit, funding, governance, and put a vision that the CEOs supported to try to encourage, support, and thank our public sector leaders for doing good work to try to drive towards progress. One of those areas that we advocated for was greatly enhanced regional rail service. We as a capital region from Baltimore to Richmond, relative to most of our peers, are very, very fortunate We've got two great commuter rail systems in BRE and MARC and Amtrak, providing great service on the Northeast Corridor and also throughout Maryland and in the state of Virginia. We've got in Baltimore, the 8th highest Amtrak ridership station in the US, and at Washington Union Station, the 2nd. And down in Staples Mill and Henrico County, the largest ridership station in the southern half of the United States. So we've got a culture that wants to use the system, yet the system is not yet operating, I think, as we see it, at that optimum level. So we set out to create a regional rail vision that knits the collective assets together. As you can see here, visions or wants have been in the cards for some time, dating way back to plans that go back decades. Progress against those plans has been more challenging, and this is not just true for this region; it's nationwide. Our country's rail systems have been a neglected asset that we just haven't been investing properly to make sure that folks can efficiently and seamlessly and reliably be able to use to get to most of their trips. So why now? What we see is great work happening in the state of Maryland and the district and Virginia. Virginia is really doing great work to transform the rail system with a program called the Transforming Rail in Virginia Initiative, which they went ahead and worked with CSX and Amtrak and BRE recently and closed the deal just a couple of weeks ago, where they acquired hundreds of miles of right-of-way from CSX. They're going to share right-of-way in that territory stretching from the district down to North Carolina through Richmond. And with that investment of about $500 million, the state of Virginia now owns their own destiny as they see it. Each incremental investment that they're going to make in that corridor, they're going to see positive growth and not have to come back and negotiate each time they want to go ahead and make an investment and get one more train. Each investment is going to be compounding going forward. They're doing great work on the Long Bridge expansion. This is really important for Maryland because with that expansion, we can get capacity to think about connecting MARC trains into Northern Virginia. There's an active effort at Washington Union Station for an EIS, and it seems like the folks here know quite well what's happening at the BNP, but that's a huge opportunity with money on the table that's already moving forward, which is great. And the BNP tunnel, which I'll take a couple minutes to talk about as well, is critically important for Baltimore, for the state of Maryland, and for the Northeast Corridor. We've also got a huge opportunity right now, I think, with our Maryland delegation leaning in a significant way, wanting to help on regional rail infrastructure. From Anthony Brown on the T&I committee to Senator Cardin, Van Hollen, and Fume, Representative Mfume and Sarbanes wanting to lean in and support. We're well positioned, and you've got a president who, unlike any in recent time, wants to make huge investments in our existing regional rail system. So we're primed to move forward. Yet we don't have a plan that really kind of looks across the systems, and that's what we were trying to achieve here. So in December, we released the vision, and we followed that up recently with additional efforts, technical report, an economic impact brief, glossy, really great rider and station experience from Gensler, as well as an equity analysis mapping experience. So I'll walk through a few of those. I'm going to be as quick as I can because there's a lot on that website. I would encourage folks to go there. I just like to get to questions as quick as we can here. So what are we looking at, right? Regional rail is not the end of its, into itself. We're looking at what it can achieve. We think that this is a huge opportunity to enhance our regional economic competitiveness and collaboration. Baltimore and DC sit 42 miles apart. Sometimes mentally we think that we're much farther than that, but Baltimore to DC is a shorter distance than San Jose to San Francisco. Yet out there, they see themselves connected at the hip, working together And they're trying to expand a system. We've already got our system in place. We're just not yet realizing its benefit. This is a huge opportunity to connect those dots and enhance our connected economy. We've got to make sure that we do it in a way that's inclusive and supports job creation for those folks that can use it the most, as well as targeted investments to make sure that when the service comes, that folks aren't being priced out that live there today. And then finally, we've got 60-ish stations as we look across the VRE and MARC system with limited transit-oriented development, placemaking that folks are seeking and wanting. We've got a huge opportunity to try to limit or better address our moderate and affordable housing needs throughout our region. How do we do that? We've got to be looking at bidirectional run-through service down in DC. We've got an opportunity with Long Bridge's investments and others to look at running trains into Northern Virginia and vice versa, Virginia into Maryland. Because at the end of the day, we've outgrown our kind of systems, our economies, and our user demands have expanded beyond the current travel patterns in our estimation. And we've got an opportunity to go ahead and expand that. We've got to look at expanding service. That's critically important. You can't just run trains beyond Union Station. If you take a look at the map today, the map looks extensive, but it shrinks after at certain hours in the middle of the day, in the evenings, and on the weekends. You know, outside of the Northeast Corridor, the Penn Line, most service doesn't run after certain hours. So it's not even a viable option for folks to be able to utilize. And we need to change that if we're ultimately going to be improving outcomes via the regional rail system. We need to be looking at a seamless ridership experience that looks at, you know, logical flow and branding, if possible, for that interconnected regional trip, so folks understand when they're getting on in one area and getting off in the other, that they can reliably use the system. And then finally, we need to be looking at operational coordination, and that looks at, you know, how can Maryland, Virginia, DC, Amtrak, and the host railroads work collectively at a higher, more regular cadence to go ahead and be looking out at you know, locomotive acquisitions or strategies to overcome barriers, which, you know, might include platform heights. You know, all of them are solvable. If we do them together, we've got a greater likelihood of getting there over the next 25 years to make sure trains can do the fluid movement that we're looking for here. So the vision as a whole, we're looking at this over an incremental period, over a 25-year period from now through 2045. Most of our rail plans are pretty ambitious, actually. If you think about the MARC Cornerstone Plan, the VRE 2040 Plan, the Transforming Rail in Virginia Plan, et cetera, a lot of the work that we're talking about in the vision is planned. It may not be funded, but it's planned. And so what we're looking at is the incremental on top of oftentimes, and that's the differentiator here. We've got to make sure that the funding and financing is there on the capital side up front. But the operating on the backside is going to be really important as well. So in the vision, we've looked at, you know, what are the major infrastructure bottlenecks moving through to the operational efficiencies and mapped out kind of when they're coming online. Each of these kind of correlate to each phase correlates to a 5 to 10 year period. The upfront period, I mean, to be honest, we can't do anything operationally until we remove some of these bottlenecks. The state of good repair of our system is at a period that we can't run more trains over certain assets, BMP Tunnel being one. You know, the Union Station track configuration is a major limiting factor, as well as Long Bridge. But fortunately, all three of those are in flight or coming off the shelf soon, hopefully. And with that, you know, we can start to think and dream about what's possible down the road. And when we get there, we've got an opportunity to really transform the system. So, you know, ideally we don't have to wait till 2045, but in the last phase is really kind of the icing on the top. How do we make sure that the operational dollars are there to run the frequencies that we're looking for, so that you can reliably, you know, think about waking up in one jurisdiction and getting to the other for a weekend trip, or, you know, for your daily commute. Right? There's no reason why, you know, a family has to live in one jurisdiction and only work in that one jurisdiction. You know, we're limiting the ability for people to live here and grow here by the limits of our regional rail system. And I think that we've got an opportunity to change that. The vision, plans for greatly expanded service. On the far right here, you can see kind of the growth in ridership or growth in service that we're planning, the current scenario, and the 200% increase in trips between Baltimore and DC. With this, we've got an opportunity to look at shrinking the travel time as well, and better connecting our economic centers. We're looking at 15-minute headways. This is the map that looks really expansive, but in the off-peak hours, it goes down to one line. But we're looking at 15-minute peaks or travel times both directions in the morning, or sorry, all day, and Monday through Friday, and no more than an hour on the off peaks. 30 minutes on the outside the core territory that you can see here. Here's the hard facts. It's not going to be cheap, and we're going to have to fund it, right? Fortunately, like I said, most of these things are in planning phases and likely in the plans to be funded. We're estimating somewhere north of $1 billion that currently isn't in the pipeline of plans on the capital side. So total investment that we're looking at over the next 25 years includes roughly $23 billion. And this is over 25 years. We're not asking for all of it up front, but we also have to be realistic with what it costs to have a competitive regional rail system. You can't just invest in the capital side, you got to have the operating side. And so what we've got right now is a $245 million operation between MARC and VRE. That's going to have to greatly increase to be able to get to the service frequencies that we're talking about. But it comes with benefits, right? If we can do this, we estimate that the gross economic output from the capital side is going to be over $40 billion. Our labor income is going to be $15 billion, and we're going to create hundreds of thousands of jobs. That's just on the capital. The ongoing annual operating investment is going to also have returns that exceeds $1.3 billion from the investment in the people and the operations. It's also going to greatly enhance our inclusive growth and access to moderate and affordable housing. Today, at a static level, our regional rail system sits adjacent to 870,000 households, comprising 2.2 million residents and 1.7 million employees, employees within 2 miles of each station. Yet, we aren't realizing or thinking about the regional rail system as an asset that can ultimately connect those people to jobs, to essential destinations. And it's got a huge opportunity. I think one of the things that when we were doing the mapping experience here, we found that 1 in 5 Black residents live within 2 miles of our Penn and Camden line stations. And just expanding service on those lines alone could greatly enhance their ability to be able to get to jobs and other key factors if possible. And MARC tickets are affordable relative to other options. And so looking at it and thinking about how we can better connect residents of all backgrounds and economic conditions is important. How do we do it? We've got to be looking at not just the capital side, which our friends at Amtrak and MDOT and VRE and the like will do for us, hopefully, with support from everybody here. But we've also got to be looking at some of the sticky things that might get in the way of actually realizing the movement of the trains that we're talking about on all of our lines. And preclude our ability. We might make a decision in the next 5 years that could be very costly in the future, and we've got to get ahead of that today. So, first and foremost, we got to have enhanced regional coordination. In the vision, you can see conversation about how we propose strategically overcoming some of these barriers that we identify. But enhanced regional coordination is really important. Fortunately for us, MDOT is in conversation on a regular basis with the regional partners and in conversation with the regional partners about enhancing the regional conversation to a regular cadence, planning and strategic level, which is really important for this vision, but also important for a lot of other activities that we have happening within the region. From that coordination, we can do things like shared planning, project development, and procurement strategies. That's really important. Getting at, some of our biggest limitations, locomotives, train sets, and the like. We've got to think about, how we can procure things, equipment, and ticketing systems that might be more cost effective if we were to go ahead and do them together, and also, enable the future that we're looking for today, and make it more cost effective in the future to ultimately have that system. One exciting thing that I read yesterday, and this is getting super wonky, but right now, if you take a train from Baltimore, say to Richmond, or Richmond to Baltimore in a given day, you've got to stop at Washington Union Station for 30 or 45 minutes for the locomotives to change and train sets to change, because we've got a electric to a diesel operation. That's very time consuming, but it doesn't have to be. Amtrak with our partners here in the region are looking at what's called dual mode, and you just flip a switch and you can go from an overhead catenary electric system to diesel operations, which could cut down the time that it takes to get through that station by 30 or 20 minutes or so, which would be a huge game changer in terms of just reducing trip time. They announced that award for Siemens yesterday, which is great. We've got to be looking especially at our trains running through Union Station integrated fare pass options, because right now we've got different systems, including just on MTA systems, different pass options and purchase options. So how can we think about that seamless connected opportunity? Harmonized run-through branding. Is there an opportunity to think about how MARC and VRE's logos could or should sit adjacent to each other so that folks can understand this is the train you take if you want to go from one jurisdiction to the other? Funding and financing is critical. How do we get this done? And then finally, I think I hit on this before. We've got 60 stations, great economic opportunity. Maybe folks didn't see the economic opportunity because they've got 1 to 2 to 5 trains a day going this direction and 5 trains a day coming back. But if we get to the headways that we're talking about, there's great economic untapped opportunity. And so encouraging our partners, whether it be, say, Odenton or New Carrollton that are in flight today, to folks on the Brunswick line thinking about their future and maximizing that potential. That's going to increase ridership. It's going to increase ROI. It's going to increase the tax base. It's going to increase the opportunity. Included in there, incremental is the name of the game here. We identified kind of 13 key stepping stones for folks to consider. One's weekend service. I think the MARC Penn line has shown us that weekend service is a good thing. It's a viable thing. Ridership is there, meeting kind of the incremental operating costs. Could we look at weekend service, say, on the Brunswick line, giving opportunities for folks to be able to get to outdoor natural recreation opportunities, heads and beds, what have you? There could be a tourism opportunity. We got to be looking at enhanced daily service. We got to be looking at this line by line and investments there. Bi-directional off-peak and off-peak service. This is really important because right now a lot of our trains, especially the Camden, the Brunswick, and most of VRE comes one direction and then comes back in the evening. So most of the day you can't get to a meeting via our regional rail system. It is serving a 9 to 5 commute pattern, and there's one thing I think we're fairly confident of is that commuting is changing, at least for the next 3 to 5 years in terms of enhanced telework and remote work options. And so we got to think about our services serving more of the trip type, where more than 70% of the folks aren't commuting when they take a trip. They're using it to be able to get to a grocery store, a soccer game, what have you. And then we've also got to be looking at run-through service. This is kind of one of those game changers. We've got a huge opportunity. I'm gonna, before closing this up, I've got to highlight the BMP tunnel. The BMP tunnel, Klaus, you hit it on the head in terms of what's opportunity at the Penn Station. But the BMP tunnel is one of those enablers to greatly enhance what can happen at the Penn Station, right? We can't just assume that more trips are going to come there, and the economic returns are there. I think that it's a very ripe opportunity, but it's even riper if we could be running trains, say, enabling trains that get closer to 30-minute travel times between Baltimore and DC, growing the service by 200%. John Percari, who was quoted earlier, likes to say that Maryland already has its Silver Line, that Northern Virginia has and is seeing great transit-oriented development. It's called the Penn Line. We just have to unlock and unshackle the opportunity for the growth to happen. The BMP tunnel is the biggest bottleneck to seeing that opportunity. We're fortunate, unlike our peers up in New York and New Jersey that talk a lot about the Gateway, we're fortunate the BMP tunnel has an EIS complete. It was done in 2017. I'm optimistic that our partners at MDOT, MTA, and Amtrak are working hard with the city and others to try to get this off the ground. Don hinted, this is a great project for President Biden's initiative for infrastructure, but it's not going to happen on its own. This is a mega project. It's going to take a lot of people working together hand in hand, pushing this forward, because it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen right away. It's going to take years. But if we do this right, it can be great beyond just the travel option. The economic returns on a multi-billion-dollar tunnel project for Baltimore and Baltimore City residents is huge. Job production. There are rumors that that tunnel is going to create a lot of earth waste that could potentially be used to fill in a highway to nowhere. There's no reason why we can't think creatively and make sure that this is a benefit for generations to come. So projects are important, but we got to look at the vision to be able to knit everything together. It takes partners. I'll close it out with this. Takes partners like Transit Choices. We had an advisory committee that included elected officials and NPO folks and business folks and advocates. It takes a willing federal government. We met with Secretary Buttigieg in March, and to say he is not gung-ho about rail is an understatement. I think there's a active competition on a daily basis between him and the president to see who can one-up each other on the rail front. We were really lucky to have a project team here with EY, VHB, WSP, and Gensler. Not included here is the technical partners that included, folks that actively engaged from DDOT, MDOT, MTA, Amtrak, VRE, and DRPT in Virginia, helping steer this vision to make sure we weren't going off into unreasonable and uncharted territory. But I think, we landed with a bold vision, but it's not going to happen overnight. Plans oftentimes sit on the shelf, but with partners, we can actually go ahead and see it through and make sure that we can realize some fraction of this effort. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and love to answer any and all questions.
Thank you, Joe, for your wonderful presentation. We'd like to open it up to questions. I saw some questions in the chat. Brian, if you're still with us, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. This is Brian with Maryland Sierra Club. Joe, why not use the opportunity with your rail vision to advocate for greater use of electric rail versus reliance on diesel to reduce air pollution significantly?
Yeah, so two items. One, I'm encouraged. I believe Amtrak and Maryland are working to move towards a more electrified, cleaner locomotive fleet, which is positive for a lot of reasons in terms of performance, but also for the environment and for the communities that the trains travel through. The challenge, as we saw it in the opportunity, I don't think that our vision precludes electrification. I think the challenge becomes, how do you realize that with the appreciation that, outside of the Penn Line, we're running on Class 1 rail territory that are not big fans of electrification for their own operational purposes. with the newer locomotives and fleets that are online, they're cleaner, they're faster, they're more efficient. Are they as good as electrified rail territories? No. Do they get us a long way down the field? Yes. Would we take electrification if we can? Certainly. But I think the vision can still be achieved in terms of the operational efficiencies that we're looking for with a mixed dual mode fleet. I hear you loud and clear. Electrification would be ideal and the cleanest option. It's just sometimes you gotta think about the business operations for the Class 1 fleet as well.
Next question. Peter?
Yes. My concern continues to be that it's great to build a great rail system with capacity increases and so on and so forth. But if the stations themselves don't have good transit connections, they're never going to reach their potential. And, West Baltimore, Penn Station, a potential East Baltimore MARC station are talked about, being improved, but no real improvement to the transit connections to them. Are you all thinking about those issues?
Undoubtedly, I think Don hit a number of opportunities earlier, in terms of the East-West transit options, the Central Maryland Regional Transit Plan, the challenges on funding, the challenges on governance. We're actively engaged in all of those conversations as well. I think you're right. In a perfect world, everybody could live and walk to their station, but that's not realistic. And to be, frank, Baltimore's transit system is inadequate to serve, the community today, and we need to be looking holistically about its operations, its funding and financing, and its long-term governance structure. We at the partnership believe that those are fundamental, and similar to the vision, they're not going to be achieved by one individual coming in and being elected. It's going to take the collective identifying the path forward and then working collaboratively to make it happen.
Next question. Joe, I'd like you, if you can, to speak a little bit more. You had mentioned that we're looking at approximately $23 billion over 25 years.
Yep.
Would you be able to speak a little bit more about, plans for funding, the partnerships that are involved to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is big mega projects that we're going to have to fund, right? So the Transforming Rail in Virginia program that I discussed, that's a $3.9 billion program. I believe it might be 3.7. Anyway, it's significant. That's funded. That's included in there, and that's moving forward. That includes the Long Bridge project, and they've got a kind of a strategy to move that towards federal funding as well, that I think we'll hear more about soon. Washington Union Station's anywhere from $7 to $9 billion. That's not funded. That's still moving through the EIS, but we're optimistic. Representative Norton, the district's representative, and Mayor Bowser and other partners are looking at finding creative ways for funding and financing that. The BMP tunnel is a $4-ish billion project. Amtrak is looking at creative ways to bringing that one back. And I think if there's an opportunity here, there's both earmarks, right? Or there's advocacy for programs. The delegation's doing everything that they can to try to secure funding for the BMP and other projects on the rail network, as well as transit projects and the like. So encouraging them to make sure that's a priority is good. Amtrak, if they get more money, this is the number 2 project on the Northeast Corridor. They tell me, I personally think it's number 1, but we'll let it slide. But I think they've got money and they're ready to move on this one.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Klaus?
Yeah, you see it there in the chat bar. It's great that there is an organization around the capital region. So what's on the ground beats anything that's just intellectual. But the reality is, of course, that the Northeast corridor is really dominated by Philadelphia and New York, and that our relationship to the north may be even stronger. And so I'm wondering how your partnership is positioning itself in that broader context of the region that Richard Florida calls boss wash or something, and which is, worldwide one of the largest economies. And that relationship is driven, of course, by the Amtrak NEC corridor, and that is the biggest partner there that would bring this along. But that's all directly related at the hip. So your commuter rail system will also only work if Amtrak's investments on the NEC are going along. So you mentioned the BNP tunnel. That's a wonderful example of that.
Yep. Klaus, good to hear from you. I think you're right. If I could be, king for a day, I'd work the entire Northeast corridor. But unfortunately, we've got to bite-sized chunk it. We supported and helped Delegate Solomon's bill pass. It was HB 1236 last General Assembly session. This would encourage MDOT-MTA to look at studying and ultimately, if it proves ripe, running trains up into Delaware and into Northern Virginia, as well as the Penn-Camden connector in Baltimore. I think what you're getting at is the right thing. We look primarily in this area, which sometimes is too large for some folks to look at, like MPOs and states for that matter. But I think, what enables or what attracts Baltimore, in my estimation, folks to relocate to Baltimore is its proximity to the Northeast corridor, its ability to get to New York, to Philly, to Boston, and DC. And so, losing sight of its proximity to that line is going to limit the potential. And so I think the good work that folks are doing at MDOT-MTA to look at closing that gap into SEPTA and connecting to Philly via commuter rail. But any investment that I would say, first and foremost, Amtrak owns the line. Any investment that we can make in our territory is going to improve the number of trains, the fluidity, and the speed of Amtrak's trains on the Northeast corridor as well. Just like, not discussed here because it goes just beyond my borders, the Susquehanna Bridge. We're going to have to fix that if we're going to run more trains as well. So it's not a small endeavor. Going back to the beginning, like, we just haven't invested in rail as a nation for decades. And we're going to have to make some big investments and some big moves in the near term to be able to, get to a future that is more sustainable, more inclusive, and more successful.
Our last question will come from Jim. He is on mute. Let's see
I see the question. I can answer it if you'd like.
That would be great.
Yeah. So yes, we have talked to Hopkins a bit about their study and others, and we've reviewed their study. I think it was a good study, and talking about the opportunity for that Baltimore to DC connection, which is really important. They primarily, again, looked at the rail side, but I think, the rail bus transit on the Northeast and Northwestern areas, Baltimore County and beyond, need to be considered. We took a strong look at what's an opportunity at Odenton, but there's other stations that have great opportunity for economic development, but they're not going to happen unless they have transit options, right? Like, the number one employer site in the entire state of Maryland is Fort Meade. It sits just a short distance realistically from the Odenton station, which has good all-day bi-directional and weekend service, but it doesn't have a connection to the station that's, safe, frequent, reliable transit connection. And so it's a partnership. We've got to be looking at this as a whole. And so I think, Baltimore County is one, but Anne Arundel and Howard and Prince George's as well. Fortunately, I think, the elected leaders in many of the counties are looking at this and are, I believe, working with the state in a positive way to not just look at what the TOD potential looks like, but what are those transit, biking, and walking kind of connections that need to be made to enhance access to each of the stations.